What's up, Footer Nation? Gary Hootenholler here, and welcome to another episode of the NYBS radio show right here from the great state of New York. With me tonight, we have William, the Hunter Man. What's up, man?
How's it going? Hello, everybody. What's new, Gary? Anything new going on today? What do we got?
We have a little bit of lag on his side, your side. But so Mike isn't here with us tonight. Unfortunately, he got stuck at work. So Will and I are going to rock out this show about all things Bigfoot in the winter. With winter here in New York, like especially right now, we have a lot of snow. And for an apex predator like a Bigfoot would be in this, the amount of food, calories, things like that it would have to take in for biological reasons, and also traveling the woods with feet of snow, it would have a lot of challenges. It would not be easy. As we know, wildlife in general have a hard time up here when it's winter like this. And this year we've actually had a winter where it's been very cold, a lot of snow. So we're going to kind of get into the gritty.
Yeah, you can hear me? Can't hear you, Gary. Hello?
Hello, can you hear
I
me
got you.
now?
Yes, I hear you clear. I hear you
All
clear
right, yeah,
now.
sorry everybody, my mic totally just I had to plug it in and plug it back out. Oh, technology. All right, so let's get right back to it. So what I was talking about, Will, I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
Is that how about we get into like what would a Sasquatch need for the winter to survive? Like, what would we have to do? Like what? So let's start there.
Well, I think we got to look at the Sasquatch as a possible omnivore, as they would say. You just can't rely on protein. I would assume that they would go with plants. There are a lot of winter foliage in the underneath the snow that they can find. There's a lot of plants like onion grass. There's wild garlic during the wintertime. There's dandelion roots. Dandelions might not be around, but the roots are there, very nutritious for them as well. So, and sometimes when we look at other animals like squirrels who like to bury acorns and stuff, I'm sure that they understand other animals what they do to survive, and they pick up on it. And I'm sure they can even scrounge on the ground for bulbs of some particular plants and acorns and stuff like that. What's your take, Gary?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you 100% on that. Like, so, so many people talk about Bigfoot and they're always like, oh, well, they would have to hunt deer. They would have to hunt, for protein. So they eat, squirrels, rabbits, et cetera, et cetera. But just like humans, you know what I mean? A lot of our diet is more, omnivore based. It's vegetable based. It's fruit based, nuts, things like that. In the winter, you would think from a biological standpoint, the amount of calorie expenditure that a Sasquatch would have to try to catch deer in feet of snow, regardless if it's 7 foot tall, in feet of snow, it's not worth it. It's literally it's not worth it. It's gonna express more and use more calories to get to try to capture a deer than it would actually to be able to consume it. So it doesn't make sense to me that from a logical biological standpoint that we would see them really hunting deer and other animals. What do you think?
I agree. Deer are going to be a lot harder to catch, especially when it's snow deep, compared to it being able to run out in the open. Nature presents a lot of problems, especially during the fall and the wintertime with the deep snow. Because think about it, the last about a week ago, I was out in the back of my house feeding my chickens and stuff, and I was watching deer come off the side bank. I noticed one limping, so I took my binocs and looked and seen that it had a broken rear end leg. The leg was broken, the bone was sticking out. It was a young deer. I know, nature can be very brutal. It possibly wouldn't survive. But just to think, what caused that break in that deer? Maybe when you're running and prancing on the snow, you can fall into pockets, deadfalls, trees, holes, rocks. It presents a lot of danger. So I think a Sasquatch is wise to that because of its size. That they don't look to run and chase down things. I mean, they are maybe able to hunt and be strategic or work in teams. But I don't think they want to exert energy because just like a bear does, they probably would eat a lot and rest more. I don't know if they're nocturnal or not. We haven't really identified that fact, but they can be partial hibernators where they would just hole up and not exert enough energy, but keep retaining that fat from the plants.
Yeah, and exactly. And like our brother Mike just said, unless they're like the deer are yarded up, and Angela just said that, sorry. And like, unless the deer are like yarded up, then, maybe in that situation. But then, deer are very alert, right? So the minute they would see a Sasquatch either coming along, the wood line, things like that, I mean, they're going to take off. And right now we have like 4 or 5 feet of snow up here, so just the idea that they would be able to run through 4 or 5 feet of snow at a fast enough pace to get deer and things like that, I mean, it's hard to say. And then we have to get into, well, all right, so they get deer. Let's just hypothetically say they get a deer, right? There would be so much sign that they got a deer, like the
Yes.
tracks, the snow. You would know that a Bigfoot literally just ate a deer, like they snapped its neck or whatever it needed to do, right? But we just don't see this.
Right. I totally agree. Um, you know,
That's like one of
just
the
like,
main issues is we don't see a lot of sign. Well, Bigfoot would
right.
go ahead.
Check your mic.
So that's the thing is like, so where is the sign now? So anything that, yeah, yeah, it's working right now.
Okay.
So anything that we would see, especially in snow, you're going to see that something just got killed. Like I just saw a coyote kill recently, and you could see the coyote's shredded the rabbit, right? But you could see everything that happened there. But with a Bigfoot, we do not see this.
Yeah, it's a possibility that when a crime scene is established, they would probably uh knock it out somehow. I don't know if we can say they work in teams with it because we don't know the intelligence factor on them. Or they could be very smart and work in teams with it. One will do a drive and set an animal up for it to be taken, and once it's subdued, maybe they carry it off into a cave dwelling. We don't know, but it's a possibility because there should be a crime scene, like you said, and it's not yet to be established.
But even if they carry something off, you're still going to see that they, you're going to see that they carried something off, but we still don't see that. I have yet to see proof, 100% proof that, and I hate to say it, unless someone can show me that, then like you would see a large 1,000 pound bipedal, whatever you want to call it. If you want to call it spiritual, you want to call it, biological, you want to call it whatever that, you would definitely see it walking away.
I totally agree.
And we just don't see it.
Right.
And
totally agree.
So
what about what's your take on,
and then
like,
we talk about bears.
Okay.
No, go ahead. No, I was just saying. Then it's like when we see bears. Bears don't hibernate. We know that. In New York, it's torpor, so they do torpor hibernation. Very short period of hibernation. Bears are out all winter long. Hence why we see bear tracks all over. And once again, that's that's for another day. So, and like Angela just said, not many people get off trails in the winter. I mean, correct. Not a lot of people get off of trails in the winter, but for the amount of sighting reports that people say that they see Bigfoots and they see all these other things like that, we just don't find the tracks. And a lot of the tracks, and Will and I and Mike will go over them. A lot of the tracks are bears. They're not Bigfoot. It's a bear double step. We see this time and time again. And the issue is that regardless of how stealthy something would be in the, spring, summer, and fall, from a biological standpoint, in the winter, nothing can be stealthy because you can track it. You can still track it.
Exactly.
So that's where, the problems, is, scientists, like me, I'm an ecologist. So for me, we track animals. You're a hunter, you hunt, you track animals. In the winter, we should have no problems tracking animals, but we still do.
Right. So one of the things I
and this is where.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
So one of the things I want to collaborate on is sometimes when we think what they can possibly do to survive, we look at chipmunks and squirrels. What do? They collect the nuts. They bury it, but a lot of squirrels also take it into the trees, and chipmunks on the ground. They make their own compartments where they store food for the winter. I always wonder, because if Sasquatch has the same intelligence as we do they store and collect food and put it in their caves or dens or bedding areas? So it reduces the minimum amount of wandering around and the stress of trying to search for stuff at the last minute. So between storing food and considering them omnivores, which they can eat meat and plants, but when meat is not available, they resort to the plant species. I want your take on that.
Yeah. And I mean, I mean, I agree with kind of what you said. So if we're going to look at something that's super intelligent, right? Like we kind of are, and we say that they must be intelligent and more like, masters of their environment, right? So it's just that we don't live in the woods like they do. So because of that, we're not going to have the same, take on like how they would survive. So when we do look at the small animals, as you said, squirrels, chipmunks, some, birds, things like that, the raptors, right? They do have a tendency to, basically stockpile food, right? So if we're going to look at it from that perspective, then yes, I mean, I would say it would be very plausible that something like a Sasquatch would be able to do the same. I mean, now the question though would be, if they were going to do something like that, then how would they be able to keep the amount of small food? We'll say like acorns, berries, winter berries, things that are very small in nature. How would they be able to keep that away from things like, voles, mice, you say other small animals that get into these things and then start eating all the food.
Yeah, I kind of question that once in a while. Um, you can hear me, Gary? One of the things
Yep.
I've always uh, think about too. Let's look at the physiology of a Sasquatch. An animal of that magnitude, size, and with a lot of hair on his body, probably can withstand extreme cold conditions that would break a normal man, even if he was wearing suits and boots. And we wonder, how do they survive? Nature has its way of adapting to cold weather and extreme temperatures. Um, Not only the cold
No,
weather
I
and
agree.
their heart, we don't even know their heart rate. When you look at a little bird that goes and survives in a bush and 8 below 0, how does that little tiny bird and able to keep warm, even though he's in a little clump of trees because of the temperature? Well, most animals that live in that type of environment, their heart rate is 10 times faster than the human heart rate. So when you look at a squatch, a large Sasquatch, is his heart rate 10 times faster that's able to him to retain heat in his body? What is his metabolism as he eats? Does he have because of his size and immensity, would he have a slow metabolism which allows him to digest food at a slower rate in his system and not burn excess amounts of food right away? His body's designed to actually eat a little at a time. When we look at deer with the three stomachs, they regurgitate. One goes to the next stomach, then to the next stomach before it's digested and emptied out of the body. So they're able to sit for almost a week or two and still have additional stomach pouches with extra food to hold them if food is scarce, or even during a storm, they can bed down and regurgitate and eat from the opposite stomach. Um, when we look at Sasquatch, how do they be able to sit for a period of time without food, but maybe their metabolism, I would assume, would be a little bit slower. Yeah, there.
But I mean, yeah. So yeah, that is one of the big. What you brought up such a good point, because we would have to assume for biological function to happen, right, that their metabolism would have to be fast. They would have to be. I mean, if they don't hibernate, they don't do topar hibernation. They are, biologically out doing their thing, which they would have to be, because otherwise we wouldn't have Bigfoot sightings in the winter, right?
Yeah, totally agree.
I mean, that would be that simple. To move around, just be able to survive, and that would be the first thing, is keeping. Would then have to mean that
Check the mic a little bit.
so they would have to be able to keep moving. So if they're not going to hibernate, then they winter. Um, so we get into then that talk of hibernation versus migration, right? Do we think that they migrate, or do we think that they stay put where they are? What do you think?
I think they possibly do migrate because you can't stay in one area that's going to be without a food source after a period of time. Buffalo migrate. A lot of big mammals do because, fortunately, as a deer will migrate to search for certain foliage in different distances because what is available in one area might not be there any longer within that season. So just like bison will migrate miles just for food, I would assume Sasquatch would have to do the same. So I'm sure they have point A and point B in different places to go. They have a route and they know what to do, and maybe they go out to a lower lands and different elevations where snow is less dense and the pressure is less for them to survive.
Yeah, and that would make sense. But as far as a migration now, they would have to be able to, I mean, like animals follow food, right? So that's kind of what they do. So they have to be able to follow the food. Yet in New York, when they're migrating, the woods are pretty much the same. So we're looking at it from okay, so say like the Bigfoots are in Lake George, right? Then people say they go through Whitehall and up into Vermont. We hear this all the time. Yeah, if that's going to be the case, and we know that there's still conifer and pine trees in Vermont for so now we can look at snowfall totals maybe being a little less under the conifers, a lot of animals shack up under the conifers, deer, rabbits, that's kind of where you can find a lot of them and things like that. But in the same sense, this still it would still then you're talking about then they would have to be hunting more proteins because they would be following the animals, right? So
Hmm.
that kind of, but then the amount of calories they're going to expend trying to, get these animals, right?
Right.
It's still kind of the same situation because when you go to Vermont now, because it's next to New York, or you go in northern New York, up in the higher up in the Adirondacks, you're dealing with a bigger snowpack. So that now becomes an issue because doesn't really. I mean, the environment doesn't change that much. It's not like all of a sudden it goes from woods to like you're down in Florida, right? You don't go from snow to Florida. You're still
Right.
dealing with a deep snowpack. You're still dealing with all the same issues that you would be dealing with in Lake George as you would be in Vermont, right? You're not really looking at anything different other than maybe more snow because you're going farther north. Um, so even with a migration pattern, there's still a lot of issues in like holes per se in that theory.
Yeah, I totally agree. Um,
And then that's why I've always been more in the I guess camp per se that maybe they don't migrate as much as everybody thinks they do, and maybe they kind of stay put. They stay within maybe like well, hypothetically a 50-mile radius of where they are. But to do a long migration, that's going to be hard because the amount of calories and the amount of danger. I mean, let's think about that too. If they're migrating, they're migrating through human trafficked areas, right? I mean,
right.
all these places that people are seeing them, there's highways, there's towns. I mean, all these things. Like take Whitehall, for instance, in Lake George. That's all main roads through there. So, and even traveling through the woods, which I've done extensively in that whole entire area, that it's not really that wild up there. There's houses that are backed up to the properties. There's all sorts of side roads. There's a lot of camps up there, hunting camps. Then you have the main roads, all this stuff. So the idea that they would migrate, and we talk about safety, being stealthy, all these things, it kind of almost goes against that, right?
Yes. Yes, I totally agree. I
So
never get hit.
if they stayed though, yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay. Yeah. So
So it's like,
I just think that maybe they just stay local and they do dumpster hopping. They go in people's garbage dumpsters. Maybe they're just like scavengers, opportunists when they can get a chance. That could be one of the theories. Second theory is maybe if they had to do a migration, would they leave before the winter sets in? Maybe they know the environment so well that they know it's time to leave before the winter actually appears. We don't know that yet, but it's a possibility. That's why the data collecting on the tracks and the sightings have to look. We have to look at those dates, the weathers, and compare the notes with other people and other sightings, so we can know exactly what the pattern is during that time of the year. Gary, you and I know that foliage grows, every year simultaneously. Some die, some are born. But what happens if one season tends to extend a little bit different? So it's like deer. How did a deer know that there's going to be plants growing in the lowlands or in a different area, maybe miles away? to search for that particular food? How do they even know where to go and when it's actually going to sprout? Because just like the seasons change, you get your good days and you get your bad days. Sometimes the foliage grows off season. One day it's not growing as fast as last year, or because the weather is warmer, it grew faster and earlier or later down the road. We don't know. It's like an environmental change.
Oh, 100%. And I mean, we could say that about oak trees, right? So oak trees every year, they don't produce every single year. So when we talk about acorns and things like that, we need to remember that some years there's heavy acorns, and then other years there's no acorns. They don't drop. So the deer, and animals specifically know that certain years that oaks, the when they start reproducing, they're not going to end up reproducing a lot of oak, like a lot of acorn. And then you're also dealing with the different types of oaks, right? So these are things that, like you said, every season's different, and especially if you have like one year that you have a heavy acorns coming down from some oaks in an area, that next season you're not whatsoever. It may make two. It's usually like by season, every other season that they start dropping acorns again, and a lot of people don't realize that.
That's true. That's true.
And then we start getting into the pines, you know what I mean? And think about like pine nuts, things like that coming from the pine cones. Like a lot of people are like, oh well, they eat pine cones, blah blah blah, but they're literally eating the pine seeds. They're literally ripping up in those conifer cones to get into the seeds of the cone. And once again, those seeds have calorie expenditure, so they have a lot of calories in them that they would end up eating. But again, only like certain seeds of pine trees are more edible. So you gotta know they would have to also know that.
Exactly. I totally agree. Um, I just want to state one thing too. When we look at these animals, there's a lot of different mushrooms that are also edible. You got turkey tails, you got lion's mane, you got wood ears, you've got oyster mushrooms, orange jelly, amber jelly roll, all different type of species of mushrooms that are also edible, and they're available during the wintertime. One thing I want to mention, Gary, that we never really mentioned and we never really got a chance to talk. You ever look at a maple tree, how we tap it for syrup? Well, sometimes you can break a maple tree's limb and it'll start to leak water like crazy. I wonder if they would break a leak and drink out of that. You can, you can hear me, Gary?
Yeah, you there? All right. Yeah, but that is, I mean, it's very possible. It's just like, we talk about the different like saps from trees too, right? So like a lot of people talk about like maple, because we're talking about maple trees, right? You can eat the propellers of maple trees. So those little seeds inside the propellers themselves are calories. So once again, if we're talking about, foraging, things like that, they could, easily chew on things like those. But then we even can talk about different saps from trees, right? So like, birch trees have sap that's edible, not even just maple trees. A lot of the different trees you can get sap from. They make tinctures from them and different teas. So if they were able to do that by without damaging the tree fully, then that would be another way that they can get calories. Especially birch trees. Birch trees are soft, And then if we kind of think about some birch trees in general, if you want to think of it from, a logical standpoint, how many birch trees do you find down in the forest? A lot. You find because they're soft wood. So one of the first storm damaged trees are birch trees. So, once again, is some of that from a possible Sasquatch, ripping a tree down to eat sap, is that, or the trees fall. And now that they've fallen, it's easier to get the bark off the trees. So, can they use it that way when they would know that the tree is kind of still partially alive and still producing sap, or the sap that's still held in the tree? These are things that, these creatures would have to know. They would know because that's how they're surviving.
Right. I agree.
And then, like you say, then we keep talking about conifers because there are trees that, once again, the pine needles are high in vitamin C, so people use them for tea and tinctures and things like that, but you can eat them. So are they eating, some of them? But, some of them are toxic. So it's like they would have to know that younger conifer trees, that you eat the younger pine needles, not the older ones, and things. But once again, we live in these conifer areas. So would it be something like that they would, stay in those protected areas? You say low snow load, lots of wildlife, right? Because it's protected, shaded. I mean, once again, the pines get dark so quick before any part of the other forest. The deciduous part of the hardwood forest stays light the longest. I would think that, pine trees and conifer trees would have to be a staple food source, especially in February, when February is the harshest month for even trying to find food. Because you're on the tail end of winter. Winter's basically, you're on the tail end of winter, but winter is now taking its toll, right? There's not much that goes on in February. Like fish metabolism start dropping. There's, mating season happens. So the animals are all revved up for mating season, which then, I mean, if you want to go into that, then yes, I mean, maybe they would hunt a little more because the animals would be in full mating season. So, but then animals are more aggressive too. So, it's like when maybe is that a Sasquatch's mating season? Is it the same as a lot of the other animals? So, I mean, again, it's just all based on theory and idea, but February would be a tough month for a lot of animals because they're mating. They're trying to find the last of the food because all the trees start becoming bare. There's a lot of snow, so they really can't dig up on the ground anymore. So it's literally survival at its best.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Definitely. Um, One of the things I want to also say is, what also comes to mind a lot of times is, do they go down towards riverbanks? Do they eat vegetation from the streams, the ponds, the lakes, cattail roots, um, any, thing that they could find in the water, possibly fish? And I used to wonder sometimes about the fasting theory, where animals don't actually eat on a daily basis. They eat within a 3, 4 day period. They're able to, their metabolism slow, so they can actually bank out 2 or 3 days and then consume something and then continue. Nature had this way of holding them off to survive by having them do it. Similar, sounds like fasting, but in a way where they're not able to digest food at a faster rate because they need that time period to survive. It gives them like a doorway to search and seek out stuff without burning up so much energy and without starving to death.
Yeah, no, that would be a great theory. You know what I mean? Like we see that in a lot of animals, and they would have to be able to adapt to a fasting, right? And yeah, things like cattail roots. I mean, those are out all season. They can pull them up as long as the ground isn't super frozen. Even watercress. Watercress is a great aquatic plant. It loves the cold water. It grows all winter long.
Yes.
You can find it in streams and things, and it's basically like salad. So that might be something too, if they can find some of the aquatic plants that are still in vegetation that still are hanging on along the shorelines and things. So you would have that. And then you even have like nettles and things that are along the woodline edges still. Those are still around. They're on all the edges of the farm fields and things. But then once again, even though they're in the more sheltered areas, the snow load, it makes things a lot harder. But even with snow load, it comes back full circle to what I was talking about earlier. Again, if a Sasquatch was digging in the snow to try to find things on the ground, just like the deer do, right? The deer scrape everything.
Exactly.
We then again would have a lot more evidence to back up that, because the sign would be there. And for me, that's always been my issue with the Bigfoot phenomena. And once again, like, I'm not a skeptic. People that know me, I've seen a Bigfoot. I was face to face with a Bigfoot. I've seen a Bigfoot. So it's not that I don't believe. But it's the idea of, from a logical scientific background, that I come from science. That's what I do. There would just be sign, and we just don't see it. We really don't.
I totally agree.
And,
Totally agree.
and it's like people post that they see all these Bigfoot tracks, right? So, okay, hypothetically, if these are Bigfoot tracks, and then like you and I talk about, and Mike, and you follow them somewhere, right? Get your snowshoes on, get walking, get checking them out where they are. But it just, once again, they magically either disappear. People don't really follow them. People take one picture of one track in the snow. We're talking, I mean, this is when the skeptics can have a field day, because again, I don't even disagree with them either, because I'm like, well, no, you're 100% right. Like, there should be nothing but sign. And when they're scavenging, like I say, we see the deer sitting there digging up all the grass, getting down to the grass, trying to get whatever they can get off the bottom. So does it go back to your theory, what you brought up about, do they have caches? Do they have little storage caches that they're able to, pull out of? Which then the fasting theory would make a little bit more sense, right? Because then they can fast and still eat their whatever they have, acorns, watercress, nettles, bittercress, things like that, all kind of choke berries, winter berries that they may get, once again, cattail roots, winter gourds, gourd roots, things like that. What do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. You know, I'm sure they search for just about everything. I mean, this is their element of survival. This is their world. They probably more advanced in survival in the wilderness than we would ever understand or experience. Uh, Mankind only knows what we find that we able to use and eat for ourselves, but nature is just a little bit different. They're more advanced than we are. They can smell food and distance, even the sense of smell. I always wonder, can they smell long range as well as hear or see in distance? It's like deer can smell if something's blooming in another, area that's hundreds of miles away. The same way that every animal can find a mate that's receptive to breed. They can sense a female in heat from miles away, just like a dog can. And then all of a sudden, everybody in the whole neighborhood's there. Uh, Animals and nature, just sometimes when we think we understand, it proves us wrong, because there's more to that extrasensory that they have theory that we've yet to discover or fully understand. Um, what's your take?
No, I 100% agree with you. You know what I mean? Like, that when you're dealing with wildlife, you're dealing with once again, they're masters of their environment. It's not that they're smarter than us. It's not that they're super intelligent. They're super intelligent for what they need to do to survive. That's what it comes down to be. Um, And that's what animals do. And animals are, as you know, they're always evolving, always adapting because they have to. Um, and there's so many small things like you say, pheromone trails, things like that only animals can smell, only animals can understand. So a Sasquatch and all the animals, especially this time of year, would be kind of in that situation. Because once again, we're in coyote mating season right now, is kind of finishing up, and hypothetically, if, Bigfoots follow coyotes to scourge their food, right? So that's one of the theories, that food that the coyotes kill. And then they get an easy pickup from that. Again, that's a theory and it logically makes sense. But from a pack mentality, I technically don't believe that, because coyotes just are not scared of pretty much anything. And especially now, they're not even scared of humans now, because they're getting so used to us, because so many people are in the woods and coyotes are coming right up to your wood line and backyards now, and your chicken coops and every other thing. So they're really not as scared. So, once again, a pack of coyotes against a Sasquatch, I just don't see a Sasquatch being able to take out a pack of coyotes. I don't. Like, you're talking about numbers, and coyotes are no joke. Like, they're just no joke. They're bred. They are killing machines. I mean, there's a reason for that. So,
I agree.
but yeah, no, so I agree. It's just like the animals, and they would know everything that's going on. So it's like a double-edged sword of like, here we are in February, which is the harshest month for food. So, but yet we have all these animals now in breeding season. So they're already kind of starved. So they're kind of already probably on edge too, right? Because they're hungry, they're starving, but now their hormones and are all going crazy because they're trying to find mates, things. So the woods aren't as quiet and as calm as they were in January, when, end of January, coyotes get started. But, when things were a little bit more quiet. On top of the amount of snow we have. Like, we have a lot of snow up here this year. So that throws a. So what do you think with that?
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. Everything you're saying is just about exactly right. One of the things that also dawned to me that I kind of question, especially with omnivores, is like when you study red fox and other small critters, they have multiple dens. And the reason for this is that sometimes when an area is disturbed, they would take their pups and their babies and move them to different dens. Also, they store food in different dens. So that way, other animals cannot find their resources and steal it from them. So sometimes they'll take their pups, bring them to the other den to eat, and then take them back and move them to another den. Not that Bigfoot would do that, but my theory would be that they would have multiple shelter in place to be, because they can't rely on one shelter. They would probably have a range of different shelters in different areas that they know about as they travel, so they can get to, if possible, when the weather is very bad, or in a different situation we don't know.
Yeah, no, and that would logically make sense, because we see that, like you say, with a lot of the other animals, that do something very similar. So, I mean, and then if you have that, then they wouldn't really have to also do migration. If you have multiple shelters in an area of, say, like 25 to 50 miles around, you would then easily be able to go from one place to the other, get your food, not use a lot of energy, um, um, risk, you know, because that's what it all comes down to, is risk versus reward.
Exactly. Totally agree.
And that's the animal kingdom. All right, so we're gonna wrap it up here. So, Will, do you have any last comments?
Yeah, I would just like to thank our readers and people who are on this page and people who subscribe. Thank you for your support. But if you do have a Bigfoot sighting, try to write down everything, not just the tracks, and take multiple pictures and measurements and everything else, but write down the time of the day, the environment changes. Was it snowing that day, raining that day? Um, we need some kind of information on the area and its weather report, as well as you know what the rise and the fall of the humidity is, what vegetation might be in that area, because every county is different, and we need to try to match this with other reports to see if we can get some kind of comparison to a pattern. And once we find a pattern, we would know exactly what to look for.
Yeah, and that's what it's all about, is collecting data, collecting patterns, and trying to get those patterns to repeat. So then we have a plausible explanation for what possibly may be happening. Again, remember, Footer Nation, I can't say this enough to everybody. You know, science is going to be what solves this mystery, right? Science, maybe I'm biased because I am a science person. Like, that's what I do. But in the same sense, like, let's be realistic. Again, people post so much fake stuff, and it kind of makes what we do a lot harder, because it's like we're constantly battling what's real and what's not. And it's even worse now with AI out there, and people will believe anything. But it's our job to bear the burden of proof, to bring this to the table in a data oriented way. So as much as it's we have to be able to repeat these experiments over and over and over. So we don't know what Bigfoot does. We don't know. So it's okay to just say, I don't know. Kenny and I say that all the time. I don't know. It's okay. Because people aren't watching Bigfoots pick trees up and put them upside down in the woods. People aren't watching and seeing all this stuff. They're coming up with ideas, which is great. People don't know that they migrate for a fact. This is all speculation. So just remember that when we're talking and coming up with ideas and theories, and it's all based on speculation only, not proven fact. And it's so important to understand that. And it's so important to never say something is a fact. Like I say, I had a Bigfoot encounter. I know what I saw. I do believe in Bigfoot, but yet as a science person, I sound like a skeptic, only because we need to back up that proof and those facts. And it's so important to do, because this is why we do what we do.
Totally agree.
But all right, Footer Nation. Thank you so much for hanging out with Will and I. We'll be back in 2 weeks for another show, and Brother Mike will be back with us. Hopefully he doesn't have to work. And we'll be talking about another subject matter. You know what I mean? We're doing all different subjects. We're going to start having more guests on so we can learn from what they're doing, what they've been up to, right here in the great state of New York. But for now, as I always say, keep it squatchy, and we'll see you out on the trail. Deuces, everyone. Bye, Will.
Deuces. Take care. Thank you, guys.